Welcome to another episode of Beyond Possible podcast. And today we'll be looking at going beyond physical or beyond logical intellectual mind, because why not? We will explore the spiritual edge of the high performance and learn a lot more about something that many of you have not heard, Akashic Records. And today joining me, Tiffany May Yan Chan, a spiritual advisor to leaders, Akashic Records Master Healer. We'll go on an interesting journey of exploration of something that can help us greatly, but many of you might have some questions, suspicion, and skepticism. So let's dive in. Welcome, Tiffany.
It's really wonderful to be here with you and excited to dive headfirst into this.
Yeah. So your official title, if somebody to go check you out on LinkedIn, is spiritual advisor. How do you explain that to people?
It's interesting because people come to me at different stages. Generally, something has happened in their lives, whether it be a traumatic experience, whether they're going through divorce, bankruptcy, major sort of like WTF moment where they had a car accident and they know that there's something more, yet they can't quite place their finger on what that is that they're being invited into, but they know that they're being called to evolve and transform, and also to sort of like build a relationship with the universe. And ultimately, I do that through three ways. I have group classes where people are learning about what it is, the unseen realm, how to be able to interact and develop a relationship with that. How do you apply these principles into this reality, into their lives? Because I really believe in integration, not just having these transcendent experiences, but actually how to apply this in their physical reality. And then I also serve through the Akashic Records. So some may call it like the quantum fields, the eye of God, the book of life, but being able to tap into the collective consciousness to not only gain wisdom as to what's going on in their particular lives, but then also to access things like soul purpose. What are they here to do? In what ways can they be able to serve and to expand? What ways that they can have like deeper fulfillment in their lives? So I serve on behalf of that. And for those who feel called, one-on-one mentorship to be able to talk about what is going on in their spiritual journeys, being able to contextualize some of the things that they might be experiencing, because for many people, it's quite scary to sort of like revamp your life in a completely different way. So just offering sort of like a fellow journeyman to be able to walk the path and to be able to offer some insight as to what they're being invited into.
That's a very comprehensive explanation. Thank you. So the elevator pitch is like, I talk to universe on your behalf and help you talk to universe. Is that how would you bottom line it?
Well, I think that most people think that the universe is outside of them.
Definitely.
Right. And what I help them realize is that they are one with source, and to be able to relax into that identity and to be able to trust that part of them that is powerful, that is knowing, and that moves with love throughout their reality.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
How did you come to this work? Is it something that you've always been involved in? And or how did you tell us about your heroine journey?
I am the person who you would least likely expect to be on this journey. That's what I like to say. You know, I came from a pretty conventional background. Uh, I think like most people sort of like saw what success looked like and what was applauded by society, and like saw the ladder and just ran headfirst into it. For me, my background is in policy and in business. I ended up getting an MBA and ended up working for international organizations, and worked for the World Economic Forum, which most people will recognize for their annual conference in Davos, and did fairly well by most conventional standards. And what had happened was that I was actually in Johannesburg, South Africa, and I got into a car accident. And it again was one of these WTF moments where it was almost as if my life sort of like flipped upside down. And I didn't necessarily know what was happening, but I knew that I was being called to something deeper. And so I essentially said to the universe, I don't know who you are. I don't know what you are, but I sense that there's something more here to discover, and I'll be game for it, you know? So I basically dared the universe and I said, okay, I'll give you 3 months because anything can be solved in a quarter. And I will project manage the crap out of my relationship with the universe, because I thought that, anything can be sort of like figure outable, right?
Very, very businesslike and transactional.
Well, I approached it through the lens that I had with the tools that I
Mm.
had. And again, I love that you use the word transactional, because that's how I framed it. It was almost as if like, if I do this, then you give me that, and then I want my old life back. Meaning like my life
Or
was,
something better.
or something better, because I had a pretty lovely, beautiful life by all standards. And it was just sort of like, I just want to dabble in this enough so that I can actually revert and like go back to the life that I thought was fulfilling. But the truth of the matter is that I was hungry. I wanted more. There was something in me that was deeply insecure. Even though I was quote unquote wildly successful, I didn't necessarily know who I was beyond my title and my affiliation to organizations. So with that accident, all of that stuff just fell away. It felt like all of the armor that I had used in order to justify my worthiness simply sort of like disappeared overnight. And I had to confront who I was without those things. And when you talk about like, how do people find you and like, where do they come in their journeys? It's usually at those moments where they're just like, holy crap, like something happened where it's sort of like that wake up moment, but I don't know who I am yet. And I'm still trying to figure that out. And so I mentioned that because it began sort of like this search of like, what is real? Like, what do I actually really believe? Not only about myself, but about how I perceive the world, the choices that I have about how to like live. Because in reality, a lot of how we like live life is inherited, right? Whether it be through our parents, about what society expects of us. And it's sort of like in the back of our operating systems. But until we're actually aware of what those sort of like programs are, we don't actually make independent choices about how we want to live and how we want to navigate. So that accident sort of like cracked me open and was like, wait a minute, not only am I aware that there's some like unconscious programming, but I actually can be choiceful in sort of like what programs I want to run and how I want to navigate this reality. And so that's essentially what opened up for me, was this idea of like, I'm way more in control of how I want to live my life. And there's much more choice and free will than I probably gave myself credit for.
Yeah, I'm curious if something was already knocking at your door before the accident and you were just like, or something was off and you didn't want to pay attention or hear it. And this was kind of like a final call, a wake-up call, or like that. The way you just describe it, it's almost like interruption of autopilot. Like you just,
Yeah.
everything stops and you cannot see things the same way. So was there some signs, or it was like it really happened out of the blue?
No, there were so many signs, many signs. I was just too stubborn to pay attention.
Hmm.
Yeah. So what I like to say is that the universe will sort of like throw a little pebble to get your attention and then maybe throw a rock. And in my case, because I was so stubborn, a car came flying through the air.
Mm,
I don't think it needed to come to that, but the reality is that I was so insistent on plowing through and living the life that I thought that I wanted for myself that I wasn't willing to hear. So this manifested in terms of burnout, in terms of things not necessarily going as planned with my work. There were signs with my romantic partnership. It was like, hey, listen, like pay attention, pay attention, pay attention. But I just kept sort of like ignoring it. But in reality, those sort of like little things are invitations so that I could be able to evolve. But I just kept pushing it aside because I thought that if I just plow through, if I just suppress my emotions, if I just keep running towards the things that I thought that I wanted, then all of that other stuff will disappear. But it just kept piling up, piling up, piling up until all of a sudden there was that explosion and I was brought to my knees. I
mm,
needed to confront it because I had pushed it aside for so long. And I think that many people have these invitations, but they don't necessarily recognize them as invitations to sort of like stop, reflect, kind of like figure out and take stock of how we've been living. And so it does need to come to this sort of explosion moment. It's
mm,
almost as if these moments of transformation are either like catalyzed by like great suffering, which is, I think, for most people, or great love, right? And
mm.
I think that we would want to have that transformation happen through great love, but we don't necessarily trust that. So we have to go through the suffering process.
Yeah. So back to the quarterly plan. Was the universe God source? How did that go? And
Oh my
how long
goodness.
ago was that actually? Like, what year was the accident?
Oh goodness. It was over 10 years now.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And I had a Gantt chart. I had put it all in terms of like, okay, so these are the podcasts, these are the books. I'm going to do this during this time frame. I'm going to get a coach or a therapist to attend to these. And then all of a sudden, like, I'm going to go and like, get my old life back. But as you can imagine, when you're broken open like that, it's almost as if you think that it's going to be sort of like surface level, but when you say like a genuine yes, when you're wanting like from the deepest part of your being to like be transformed and it comes from a sincere place, it's almost as if like there's no going back. It's like the Pandora's box was open and they how I refer to like source energy, they were just like, okay, like let's go. And so, I thought that I was just going to be sort of like a 3-month therapy session, but in reality, I just kept not only feeling like a deepened curiosity, but I could feel like the depths of my hunger sort of like wanting more. And I
What was that hunger? Just curious, if you put a name on it, what was that? What was it for?
meaning,
Mm,
fulfillment, and peace.
mm,
Right? I think a lot of people are searching for that, right? And I think that I was so driven by achievement because I was thinking that that thing external to me would give me a deeper sense of like peace and fulfillment. And there was such a dissatisfaction, frankly, a disappointment when that didn't happen, right? Because it's sort of like, okay, when I achieve X goal, when I get that new promotion, when I get that car, when that person that I like, invites me to live with them, for example, then I'll feel fulfilled, right? And the reality is that when all of that stuff happens and yet there's still that hole, it's sort of like, wait a minute, I don't understand, right? Because those are the things that society told me would fulfill me, and yet I still feel so empty.
mm.
And I was still searching and hungering for more.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So, how was the last 10 years?
Ooh, Rocky.
So connection to source and in being in conversation with universe does not somehow save you from adversity or difficulties.
You know, like, let's talk about this because I think that there's like this sense of like I think spirituality is sort of like in vogue right now. Like you've got a lot of people who are popularizing this, and there's a sense of like if you finally say yes to the universe, then your life is going to be full of
You
like
will
unicorns and
manifest
butterflies, right?
everything. Yeah.
Like all of a sudden your bank account will be filled with millions of dollars and you'll have the love of your life and you'll be like deeply fulfilled in every regard. I would say that no. I call
Damn it. How
BS.
are we gonna sell this book?
Right. I feel like I feel like that sells a lot of books, and I think that people want to hear that because again, it fulfills the paradigm of the things that they're wanting. And the truth of the matter is that like sometimes that does happen, but I would offer that those external um I don't know, like manifestations of, you know, deeper fulfillment are sort of like an after effect of the deep work that one has done, right? It is because you have felt like you've gone to like the depths of your the darkness. It's because you've fallen to your knees. It's because you've understood who you are apart from those things, that you don't necessarily need those things in order to feel fulfilled, that finally they come into your life. But I don't want to sugarcoat or bypass the very deep reality of what it means to be on the spiritual path. And there are times where I've sort of like not really wanted to talk about this because I didn't want to scare people away. But I think that by not talking about it, we do a disservice to people because I feel like when people are walking the dark night of the soul journey, they feel like they're crazy or they're all alone. And that's not the
Or
reality. I
they're
think
failing again. It becomes about achievement once
right?
again,
They're
right?
failing in life. But when I see people like losing it all, there's a part of me that is frankly just cheering for them because I'm like, yes, finally, you're finally being broken open. You're finally coming to the truth of what is and who you are, right? And like sometimes it's my particular spiritual journey, and again this is not saying this for everyone, but my particular spiritual journey has cost me everything, has cost me everything. And I don't mean to like sugarcoat that. It has cost me friendships, relationships, financially. It has cost me, you know, there have been great physical struggle in terms of my personal health. And so much of this has been like a falling away process, a disintegration, so that I could sort of like be reformulated to come out on the other side.
So are you on another side, or at least what are you gaining? Like you very clearly, very honestly listed like what you basically had to say no to, and but what opened up, what became available so far?
Love. Yeah. And I think that there was a way where society has sugar coated or downplayed the power of love. But the reality is that love is the most powerful frequency in the world. And what I've found is by letting go of the titles, the money, the affiliation, the relationships, is that I actually began to know myself as the embodiment of love.
I'm really working really hard here to hold in tears, so those on the video will be able to see it, but like I'm ready to sob like when you talk about it. So it's very heart opening. I can feel it. So I just want to name my feeling, but please continue.
Yeah. I think that there are ways in which I've forced myself through life. Right. And I feel like when we disarmor we recognize the truth of who we are, and that is our inherent identity with source energy and knowing ourselves as love. And ironically, it's actually by giving away the things that we think will make us powerful that we come into our true power. And it's hard to explain to people who perhaps have never experienced that or are so sort of used to associating their worthiness by their business card. But it's interesting because when you know that you don't need that, you actually find out who you truly are. And there's a invincibility, that you encounter when you know yourself as infinite, when you know yourself as love.
Also, I know that what I gained by you making this journey, I got to experience it myself, because it was trying to remember, it was believe it was summer of 2021, yes, when I first met you, first on LinkedIn, when somebody in my network liked your post, and that's how I got to see you. And we're both co-active coaches, so it kind of was, that connection too. What stopped me in my tracks when I saw your post, that it was very openly talking about spirit, talking about love, talking about spirituality. And I couldn't believe it. I was like, who is she? And what gives her, like, is that what people do? You can do that? Like, it's like, it was, at the time, and just for the context, I grew up in the country was like religion forbidden, in Soviet Union. And then I had my own journey of, opening up to it and celebrating, yes, there is something, there is a creator, but I was very closeted talking to people about that, because I didn't grow up in the country when people just talked about God, because nobody was allowed to go to church. And talking about spirituality in the business, it's kind of like, that was just not acceptable. So you really, tapped on my bottle, I was I was like, what does this person think she's doing? So, and because I like talking to strangers, I reached out to you and said, can we talk? What's going on with that posting about spirituality? And then you graciously agreed. We had our first connection, and you offered, for me to have experienced that, to experience your work, to experience the Akashic Records session, and we'll talk more about that as well. And my experience was, like life-changing, because it's instantly I felt so much love. Like I was sobbing, our cameras were off at that point, but like I started crying, and nothing was really happening at that point except for feeling the energy that you were able to bring in, and the answers and the guidance that you were able to provide. And I had a sense of relief that, oh my gosh, okay, I'm not crazy, okay? Like this exists, and there is a way to communicate with that type of love. And then and I had longer journey too, going through the training that you co-facilitate with another Akashic Record practitioner, and kind of learning more about how to manage the information that comes in. Because the problem for me through my life was that I was always clairsentient, clairvoyant, but it was very scary, because I was like, where is this coming in? What is this stuff? How am I, like, I would, especially when I started doing coaching work and working with people, specifically as a coach, I would sometimes like know certain things about them or name things that they're like, how do you know that? And I was like, how do I know this? But the thing is that it's not always butterflies and unicorns when you kind of peek into the energy field in the future. According to whatever is happening, you see bad things too. And I didn't know how to deal with that. Like, what am I supposed to do with it? And it was like, cancel, 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 forget about it. And I think that all this work that I was introduced to through you um, allowed me to know, like, no, like, this is not the final answer. Whatever I'm seeing that does not look acceptable to me at this time, like, I can inquire more, like, what I'm going to learn, or can we change that, and what needs to happen. So I just filled up as much. I can talk a lot more about my own journey, but I really want to get back to you sharing your experience and your knowledge. But I just want to say thank you for losing everything and say,
Lose everything so that others might gain.
you know, you need to write an invoice to the creator because they need to pay you. This is good. This is huge benefit. And yeah, so where should we go next?
Well, I thank you for that. And, thank you for inviting me to be with you in that space and to be with you that way. Right. Because I feel like when you say yes to a session like that, you are allowing yourself to be seen for the truth of who you are. And in your wholeness, in your divinity, from your soul's perspective, it's like seeing yourself from God's perspective. Right. And, similar to you, when my Akashic record was open, I started bawling. Like my entire t-shirt was wet by the end of it. And yes, the practitioner was saying things that, you know, I hadn't even uttered, to a single soul, and that I had sort of like known so deeply inside. But it wasn't necessarily the words per se, but it was the frequency, it was the recognition, and it was a feeling of like coming home. Right? It was almost as if like I was fully seeing myself for the first time. And it was so sort of like relieving to be seen in my wholeness as well. Right? Because there's so many ways where we sort of like introduce us through our titles and through, what we do or our relationship with other people. But to be seen from your heart space, to be seen from the perspective of your soul, like is such a beautiful experience. And I think that's something that most people are wanting for themselves, to be seen so intimately, so that they can, be able to like share this and to be able to express this in the world. I think that sometimes people sort of like want to hide that part of who they are because either they're scared of it or they're afraid of what might happen if they show the deepest, truest part of who they are. But when you're in a session with another person, there's almost like a deep sort of like acknowledgement, a knowing, an intimacy, almost like a permission to be that fullest expression like in life. And I think that most people are wanting more of that because people are seeking a deeper level of fulfillment, but they don't necessarily know what that looks like. And when you're in a session where you're fully being seen, it's almost as if like, yes, finally, like I can breathe. And once I've felt that, in my body, I can do that more consistently outside of session because I know that it's safe to be this way. Right.
So we mentioned the name of Akashic Records multiple times. So let's explain what it is.
Yeah.
Nobody ever heard it. Like, what are they talking about?
Yeah. So Akashic record goes by many names depending on your tradition. It's been cited for every spiritual tradition. So it goes by the Eye of God, the Book of Life, if you're from a Christian perspective. For those from a science perspective, it is called the quantum field. And Akasha, Akash, is a Sanskrit word meaning ether. So it's everything that is essentially holding everything together. And the way that I explain it, it's every thought, every word, every action, and every deed across all time, space, dimension, and all levels of consciousness. Okay.
So is it
So
like a spiritual internet?
it is similar to that of Google. Okay. So very like similarly, like we tend to like understand from a science perspective that, you know, the chair that you're sitting on, for example, it's made out of like energy of atoms, right? We know that from a physical perspective, but I think what we tend to forget is that the non-physical things like emotions, thoughts, potentiality are also energy, and that we can actually sense into and feel this energy throughout our reality. And in fact, we're all doing it. When we can enter in a room and we can feel when the tension has been tight, that's you reading energy. And so the Akashic Records is the ability to read this energy, not only in your current circumstances, in your present day reality, but everything that has been past and that everything that potentially will be happening in the future. So, yes, when you talk about sort of like a Google, sort of like an internet search engine, anything that you're interested in about your life is theoretically searchable. So, for example, your divine purpose, the relationships that you're here to have, what you're here to do, the people that you're here to serve, all of that you can ask through the Akashic Records. I think the difference is that the Akashic Records is not just data. So, for example, if you want to say, you know, what is the divine purpose of Julia? Yes, the Akashic Records will spit out an answer, but they will also offer context behind it. So it's not only like, what is your divine purpose, but like, what are all the particular gifts that you're here to offer in relation to that particular purpose? Who are you here to be able to like serve in the presence of these of your purpose? Why do you feel compelled to be able to do these things, right? And I think that not only just having a static answer, yes, while that is interesting, it also gives context as to how, the why, not just the what.
Mhm. And I had experiences when certain things are just not shown, and sometimes it's either just very difficult or challenging with particular person who is staying very firmly in their analytical mind, and kind of that guard is up, and then also when clients ask for about specific person, a relationship, sometimes it's just like there is nothing. And I understand it's also because it's will be shown what's in everybody's highest good. Can you explain a little bit more? Because it's not, don't want to give people impression that somebody like you can just like pull out all the answers to life, like, or maybe you can.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think it's important to mention that everyone has an Akashic record, and that you, by being human, as it is your birthright to access your Akashic record, and in fact, you're already doing it. Okay. So it's not this sense of like only special people have these abilities. Your intuition, your gut knowing is fueled and informed by your Akashic record. Okay. So that's step one. Step two is when you go to a practitioner like myself, you're offering permission to access your record. So it's not like I will go into your Akashic record without your permission and sort of like rifle around. That is not ethical. It's not possible, and it's also it's not good practice in general. You know, I wouldn't be able to do that. I wouldn't be able to serve in this way if I were to rifle around. So your records are protected energetically. Now, in terms of like what is possible to like search for and what is revealed to you, The records will be able to like offer the relevant wisdom given your level of readiness and your willingness to receive.
Okay.
Yeah. So sometimes if you're asking me a question about a relationship, so for example, a common question that I have is like, where's my person? How come I haven't found my romantic person? Okay. And while the records will show like potential timelines as to when your romantic partnership might be available to you, what might be more interesting is like what are the particular patterns that are sort of like that you're being invited to sort of heal and to work on right now that will help you prepare for your potential partner. Why is it that you feel an insistent need to be with another person right now? What is the unmet need within you? And what is being asked to sort of like transform and evolve so that you can be in a space where you can be in a healthy relationship and a healthy dynamic with that person? So, to answer your question directly, yes, sometimes there is a blank. Sometimes the record keepers won't give you specific information because there's some like background, some like healing, some important stuff to be done before, so that when you do come to that place, you're ready to be able to receive and to fully participate in the fullness of life. And ultimately, what the records show is what is in your highest good. What is the maximum fulfillment? What will give you the most aliveness? What is the greatest potentiality given your current choices? And they will only showcase uh what is here in service of your evolution, not just in terms of your personal human evolution, but the evolution on behalf of like the whole, meaning like the collective
Yeah.
consciousness.
So basically, universe doesn't care about our, traditional success that much. Or
I mean, it's say that ambition and success are, I don't want to negate that because there's like some sense of like I can't be spiritual and ambitious, and again I don't believe that that's true.
well, that's
If
not true at all, I find, right? It's
no, if anything, I feel like the records or spirituality in general help you understand and clarify like what is driving you. Are you driven because of the programs of what society has told you to? And like if you're chasing after that thing, whether it be a gold medal or a particular like position and job, are you doing that because you're chasing or for like affirmation or like validation? In that sense, like if you do get that, there's like a hollowness associated with it. The records don't say like that isn't important. It's like that is important, but in what way can we make that purposeful? In what way can we provide like greater fulfillment in the process? And it's not necessarily the thing that you're chasing after, it's who you're becoming in process in the pursuit of, going after that thing.
yeah, yeah. Okay, so how would that be different from psychic? And I've never been to psychic, so but I just have it's very common question people ask, or even sometimes I say this is like psychic, but it's not. It's like a different level of information. So explain that comparison.
Yeah. I would say that, when you're tuning into like different radio stations, like there's different levels of information that's available to you. Like if you were to tune in to a certain frequency, a psychic would be able to offer, like these are the aches and pains, and these are sort of like the recurring patterns that are happening in your life, and that's fine. Um, but what I would offer is that when you're tuning into a different frequency, you also have context as to why you're experiencing the pain. What
Mm.
is the origin of it? Is it because you're coming in with past patterns from past lives? If that's the case, let's actually heal that. Is it because there's an unmet need that you're searching for? in what way can we be able to like access those higher dimensional frequencies so that we can provide some like healing and understanding related to that. So it's not just sort of like giving sort of like a quick spitfire like read as to like what's happening, but it's also giving a cross sectionality to your experience as a human being.
Thank you. And also, it's also has an opportunity for healing to happen within the session. So it's not just data transmit, like it's not just like the answers, information about something. It's also the opportunity for you as a practitioner to offer a way to heal something, right?
Right. So I mean, there's a couple of television shows, for example, that, you know, they have like psychic mediums and they're saying like, oh, you just put up new curtains in your living room. And that's great. It's nice to know that there are beings from the other side that are affirming that they're still with you, right? And that they're
Mhm.
seeing how you're doing your interior decorating. Great. And it's sort of like, that data point can only bring you so far, right? It's sort of like, okay, given that they're on the other side, you know, the difference between that psychic medium and the Akashic records is the Akashic records can reveal what is the sole purpose of your relationship with the person that crossed over. You know, what were they contracted? What were the agreements that you had made in order to help both of you evolve as souls?
Yeah.
In what way can we be able to offer healing to those things that are still sort of like hurting deep inside of you? And in what way can we actually unlock what is the highest potentiality for this relationship, even though the person has crossed over? So while the data point of the curtains is helpful, I think that can only sort of like keep you at a certain level. And I think what's possible with the records is that there's just more understanding and just more like wisdom that's available to you so that you can be able to heal and take the next step in your journey.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. That's very good. Thank you. And so let's talk about practical applications. You already touched on it in terms of people lacking fulfillment or people, feeling stuck or needing something that's or already feeling a sense of connection but didn't know like how to communicate, learning to tap in more into that intuition, into that guidance that coming in and trust it more. But let's look more specifically, like, you know maybe give some, without disclosing obviously too much information, and keeping the confidentiality, some examples of people that you were working with, and what were the transformational experience, and what were the context that they are working with you.
Um, so from a very practical perspective, let me just take this at the organizational level because a lot of the people that I work with are executives, largely within corporate organizations or government. And what I find is, um, once they achieve this level of like personal empowerment and seeing themselves as love, then there's also sort of like, okay, where does the rubber hit the road? How do I actually roll this out, not only in my personal lives, but then also within my team members and then the larger organizations? Because it's almost as if, like, once I find this personal sense of freedom and this empowerment, I want others to be able to experience the same, right? It's like you find a good restaurant and you're like, oh my God, it's so good. I want to share it with other people. And so you want the light to spread on. And so while the records are also about your own personal soul path, there are some really practical applications to things as well. So I do work with leaders to figure out like, okay, what is the organizational strategy? You know, in the same way that we each have our divine purpose, what's the divine purpose of the organization? In what ways can this organization be able to serve humanity? How can what are the new products or services that are wanting to evolve out during this time? And actually, how do we share this message with other people? Some people would call that marketing. So, we talk about strategy, vision, marketing. It's a very practical thing, but all within the context of sort of like divine purpose, love, and in service for other people. So it's almost as if, like, once you find this freedom, there are other ways where we want to like spread it out throughout systems wise. So I just wanted to like share like the both and, because it's not only about personal transformation, it's also about empowerment and being able to like share this message more broadly. And there are some very practical, tactical things that come out through the records that show, okay, if you want to serve the broadest amount of people with the highest impact to be of service of this time, it's probably a good idea to roll out this particular product to this particular region, in service of this demographic. And the specificity of that is really helpful when there's so many options available. I like to say that like ordinary awareness has like ordinary results. But when you open yourself up to a different level of consciousness, to a non-ordinary state of like seeing and being aware, then you have these extraordinary results that come through. And in what way can we be able to help these leaders consistently shift their consciousness so that they're actually operating in service of the greater humanity? And so that's what I'm standing for.
I'm curious, who, do you find your clients, like, or they find you directly, like, and it's kind of like a personal engagement or like one-on-one engagement, or are they already organizations that would source, somebody like you or Akashic Records practitioner through their like training, learning and development, the way they would, contract coaches? Bringing coaches in, I mean, not everybody is on the bandwagon yet, but, a lot of companies, it's a standard practice to have in-house coaches, bringing in coaches to work with people. Like, are there organizations that officially bringing in Akashic Records practitioners?
Yeah. So, for example, have you heard of the company Eileen Fisher? It's a women's clothing.
Okay.
Um, it's they actually had Akashic Records practitioners on staff in service of their employees because they found it so helpful. And this is an example of an organization that has fully integrated spirituality into the DNA of their organization. I always thought that these types of organizations didn't exist, but that's not necessarily true. It's that we just haven't heard about them. They haven't had a lot of publicity.
Yeah.
So it's almost as if it's like, okay, in what ways can we actually highlight these case studies? Because if you were to look, spiritually embodied leadership has always been there. It just hasn't been given this sort of like limelight, so to speak. So one of the other examples that I'd love to share is Salesforce. So the co-founder of Salesforce, Mark Benioff, he actually in his 20s was burned out. Like he was the youngest VP over at Oracle. He had gone to India to like do some soul searching, and he met Amma, who was, the hugging saint over in India. And she said, don't forget in your quest to do all these like amazing, powerful things in the world, like do good. And it was actually from there that he was inspired to create Salesforce's like 111 model, in which they give 1% of their revenue, 1% of their employee time, 1% in terms of like their products and services to the world. And back then, that wasn't necessarily uh, something that was common within, the business world. But the fact of the matter is that these examples of like spiritual integration have been there. It's just being able to like breathe life and to be able to showcase them more. But to answer you directly, yes, there are ways in which I'm being invited into organizations. For example, Google invited me to give a workshop on energetics with relating to their team. I am consulting one-on-one with senior executives throughout different industries and organizations. And, a lot of this is based on personal trust and relationship. So it's generally like referrals, but I am being called more and more to like be invited into these organizations. So anyone who thinks that that doesn't exist or is impossible, I would dare to say that it's already happening. You perhaps have not heard of it yet.
Yeah. I think there is a perception, especially from people isn't not working in corporate world and seeing corporate as like pure evil, and people who work there kind of not enlightened at all in any way, and only people who are doing some sort of already spiritual work or involved in non kind of commercial organizations, that they have a soul. And so I think that the people are very surprised, obviously, or people who worked in very toxic places that, but this was amazing example for you to share those. I think that will be so eye-opening to so many people. I'm curious about another leader, Steve Jobs,
Yeah.
because obviously like it's openly, like his favorite book, like his spirituality and the innovation and creation and that he brought to the world is definitely was co-created with the source. And how is Apple is really was run as a love-based organization? That's, I don't know, to me it didn't seem like it. So I don't know how much maybe you can comment on that.
Steve Jobs is a great example. So he had gone through a spiritual awakening. If you're familiar with the book Autobiography of a Yogi, he read it every single year at his funeral. It was also distributed to all of the people that had attended because he felt that it was so meaningful. So this idea of not only like personal enlightenment, but then also being able to use it as a source of creativity, because Steve Jobs, was a paradigm shifter. He didn't necessarily create from what was. And in fact, he's sort of like similarly like dismissed it. He looked out and was just like, okay, in what way can I source from? Source energy, create from nothing. They actually being able to be inspired by that divine inspiration and then create from it. And he gave himself full permission to do so. So that's like just really beautiful. Where I would like offer some like, I don't know, acknowledgement is sort of like, where does that sense of like infinite power, knowing yourself as source, come in conflict with that of the ego, right? And so it's interesting because when you sort of like realize that you're not your armor, when you are one with source energy, there's almost a way where you can use that as a opportunity to think you're better than other people.
Definitely.
Right? And I would offer that, part of what Jobs was sort of like working through during his lifetime was like, okay, his frustration with the level of consciousness with the people that he was working with, almost like helped him sort of like overpower other people. And what I would say is, as a leader, it is your personal responsibility to continue to be on your healing journey. It doesn't mean that everything needs to be healed in order to finally like take a step forward, but healing is a leadership responsibility, because as a leader, you have an outsized impact on your energy field to other people. Like your energy like drips to other people. And if you're unconsciously like operating from a place of hurt, you're actually perpetuating that trauma unconsciously onto other people, right? And that gets magnified not only through the team members, but through your products and your services and all the people that receive, and benefit from your stuff. So I feel like Jobs is a really great example of, yes, he was divinely inspired. Yes, he was able to like achieve that sort of like God source awareness. And at the same time, he also needed to sort of like take his ego into check. And I feel like being in community with other people helps keep us in alignment, right? Because whenever we're sort of like stepping out of bounds, we need other people to call forth that divinity within us, and to be able to say, hey, listen, like maybe you could reconsider that, right? Maybe this is someplace that is like looking for more healing, because we may unconsciously be aware of where we're allowing our ego to sort of like run the course. And I feel like as we're growing into these greater states of awareness, it becomes increasingly more important to have those trusted friends and relationships that can kind of keep us into check. That makes sense.
Yeah, or you articulated it so well, because it, for me, it sheds the light on my own father, who was quite a prominent surgeon in Ukraine. He passed away a while ago, and he was so gifted, and so gifted in terms of performing miracles on as a surgeon. Everybody, like, he was so guided. People are like, oh, I don't know how he does what he does, and highly intuitive on many other things. But it was very hard for him to manage the ego, and knowing that he is better than everybody else. And even growing up in his shadow was quite something for me, because people were meeting him on the street and start kissing his hands and thanking him for saving. And it really got to him. And there was addiction that happen as a result. Like, it was just a lot to manage, and I don't know if at that time in Ukraine he even knew how he was doing what he was doing. And so I reflected on it a lot, and the Steve Jobs example also helps a lot. And
May I offer a reflection?
yeah, please.
So I think that's where most people get confused, because there are different stages of consciousness, different stages along the spiritual journey, where, the first part is sort of like you feel like you're a victim to your circumstances.
Mhm.
The second stage is sort of like you feel like you're manifesting everything. And I feel like there are ways in which we can make magic happen based on our intention, based upon our focus of energy. But the third stage is actually being hollow bone, where you're recognizing that it's not you, right? It's not you. And when I'm in service to the Akashic Records, the energy that moves through me, I I allow that to take the forefront. Like the Tiffany Chan personality gets set aside, and am actually in service towards the divine wisdom that's wanting to move through. What's actually healing people is not Tiffany Chan.
Okay.
What's healing people is actually source energy. And I feel like that takes both self-awareness, humility, as well as sort of like a willingness to like be in service of something greater. Because when I think of someone like a Steve Jobs, I can feel the ways in which he sort of like got tied up, right? I make up the story, he got tied up, that he was personally making things happen,
Mm.
right? Because it was his ego that wanted that validation. But in reality, it wasn't him. He was just hollow bone.
He was like a musical instrument, a vessel,
He was a
right?
vehicle for it to
Vehicle
happen.
for it. I say in my personally, I had so many rises and falls in my life when I was like manifested something that just so miraculous. Like, I have so many stories when I just like set my mind to something and let go, and it happened super fast and better than I expected. And it was, everybody was like, wow. And I was like, wow, this is incredible. Did I fuck it up? Every single time so far? Every single time, to the point that I
Right.
was like, forget it, not manifesting anything anymore. I'm good. Because, but some people give me feedback, oh, it's because you don't feel worthy of it, like you probably have, it's your self-worth that, like you got what you wanted and you got it, so like, easy peasy lemon squeezy, and then you didn't feel deserving of it. And I was just like, maybe it's true, and but so far I'm more seeing, reflecting on it, I got tied up, like as you said. I was like, look at what I've done. And this is so amazing. And I kind of disconnected from the source. I was like, whoa, no, let's go, like enjoy this stuff. I'm so amazing. And so every time I was like, now I was like, okay, how I'm gonna be humble this time. How, so I brought back to like the humility part and being, you called it hollow boned? How did you call it?
Hollow bone.
Yeah, hollow bone. Okay. And yeah, so now I'm just like, okay, I don't know. I don't like the person that I become when I get stuff that I want with the help of the source. I get pretty cocky. So what would be your advice here?
It's interesting because the more that you become more in tune with your true identity, your true power as source energy, there becomes like an invincibility as well as sort of like a willingness to bend the knee, meaning like you're less willing to like overpower or to almost like prove yourself to other people. Because in speaking from my journey, it was almost as if like I wanted to show people just how magical, powerful this work was, because I wanted that validation, because I didn't feel safe in who I was. And I needed other people to affirm just how great and how all powerful I am, because I'm all seeing and all healing. But interestingly enough, as I've matured in my journey, I need less of that, because I'm I'm not looking to other people to validate me, because I know who I am, right? And while it is beautiful to see people transform, it's more uh much more uh beautiful for me to see people empowered, meaning that I call forth that power in other people, because that's much more rich, that's much more fulfilling, right? And it's interesting because when I think about the type of leadership that I want to see in the world, it's actually people who have become so in touch with their own sense of personal power and their identity with like source energy, that they don't need to bulldoze over other people in order to prove themselves. It's almost as if like there's more fulfillment in being able to call other people to rise.
Okay. Yeah. I think that a lot of the times people maybe don't know how powerful love can feel like. And I forget all the time and regress to that fear state that, can be powerful and generates a lot of energy. And I find it's almost like learning to walk, ability to stay in that energy for a prolonged period of time, protect that energy. So that's something I want to ask you about because, the amount of energetic hygiene it takes for somebody like you to do this work.
Yeah.
And for somebody who had experiences, transformative experiences, and tapped into it, but they go back to everyday environment when that environment does not operate on that frequency, I would say, and they kind of like default back. And before I let you answer, I also mentioned that when I first started doing the training with you, and I started doing like prolonged meditations and energy practices, I was having a very hard time returning back. And I even like talked to you, I don't know if you would remember about it, because it was like so good to be there, like so good. It felt like so good to be able to go and not rely just on Tiffany to provide that space, but be able to generate it for myself, be able to hold this for the clients. And then you just kind of like in another dimension of complete peace and love. And then you like come back and need to look at your sales pipeline and go get groceries. I was like, forget it, like I don't want this. I was like feeling I was living double life. It was so stressful. I got more, instead of being more loving and kind with my people at work, I got nastier because the contrast was too much. I was like, I was not. And your advice to me at that point is like, you're taking it too seriously. Can you just like be more playful with it? You know, like kind of along that line. And I was like, okay, I am taking it very seriously. So, and I brought that, you know, playfulness. I was like, okay, I don't have to make such a big deal about it. And, you know, but still, it's like, maybe that's why you say you lose everything. You need to change the environment. You will be different people. You will with different people. You will be living in different places because in many cases, it's might not be possible to remain where you are when the energetics around you are so different. Over to you.
Yes, and we're being called to integrate. Yeah. So I want to fully acknowledge that when when we do assume these higher frequencies and it feels so delicious, it is a rocky road because the contrast is so great to our everyday reality where other people are operating at different frequency levels, right? And it's like, wait a minute. And, you know, very quickly we can go into judgment, into criticism, and into thinking that we're better than other people because people are not that conscious or aware, or like, whoa, you know, it's sort of like, um, and I would say that, you know, be gentle with yourself. You don't need to explain everything that's going on with your journey with everyone because not everyone will understand. And also like take self-care. Like I don't mean that in sort of a bubble bath kind of way. Like what are things that are like deeply nourishing to this evolving part of who you are, and give that space and time to breathe. You know, if that means like going for a walk in nature, if that fills you up, if you feel like journaling helps give that spaciousness, give it life and breath, if it helps be in community with people, like listening to these types of podcasts, um, you know, allowing yourself downtime away from social media or television, you know, like give yourself that spaciousness to protect that growing leaf that is sort of like emerging from the ground so that more can take root. And you'll find that as you know, allow yourself that space to cultivate, the roots will go much deeper so that when the shoots do go up, the sun as it hits it isn't as harsh, right? Because you're sourcing from a deeper place. So that variance that you experience is going to be less like impacted to your energetic system. It's almost as if it's sort of like, okay, I don't need to feel like I'm pushing other people out because I know more deeply who I am and where I'm sourcing from. So there was a time where a lot of spiritual people would escape to the mountains or go to the abbey or like cloister themselves away because that was what they needed to protect their energy, and they felt like that was the only way that they could hear clearly. And yes, that served time and a space, but I really feel we are being called to integrate and to bring these frequencies into the spaces that we're existing already. So it isn't a monk meditating on the mountain. It's actually you, Julia, actually like bringing these frequencies of love to your clients into the organizations that you serve, bringing a deepened sense of peace, awareness, understanding, um, kindness in places that feel harsh. And interestingly enough, it's almost as if people are wanting and yearning for that, but they're looking for permission to be that part of who they are. But it's almost as if because they haven't necessarily seen a blueprint or a template, they don't think that it's possible. So they think that they need to armor up. So it's armored people who really want to be like more soft and be more themselves, being around other armored people. And it's like, who's going to remove their mask first? And in doing so, if you remove your mask first, not only will you gain personal freedom, you're also going to give permission to other people to do the same, right? So it's sort of like as leaders, your role is to go first. So I think that's my invitation to folks is like, let's drop the farce, let's drop the game, because I think most of us are hungering for something more authentic, not sort of like in a brash way, but in a sense of like realness and intimacy. But it requires someone to go first.
So what are the steps that people can take to start building that trust and relationship with God, Spirit, Source, and for themselves? And also, as we're closing, also tell us how they can get in touch with you.
I think that there's so much noise in the system right now. So it can be as simple as like turning off the television.
Yeah, it's
um
very hard to compartmentalize right now. Yeah.
there's a there it does, and it doesn't mean that um you don't care. And I, again, as mentioned, my background is in policy and international business, and so I'm very aware of the impact of what's happening globally. So I don't mean like shutting out the world, but I am in favor of being discerning about what you're consuming and setting a time limit to how you allow those things to impact your system. So for example, if I'm going on, reading about the world, I'll say, I'm setting a time limit for 10 minutes. I understand what's going on, and that's it. And if there's any conversation that is devolving into cynicism, I'll either, politely ask, for the conversation to shift, or I'll just like, leave. Simply because it has like an impact on my energy. Now, in relation to how do you build a relationship with spirit's already talking to you all the time. It's just a matter of like, are you willing to be in conversation with it? And so what I would say is start experimenting, and again, be playful about it. This doesn't necessarily mean be like, oh, I got a little wink from the universe, and if I don't take an action, then it's all going to be condemning to me. Oh, you're receiving invitation. It's sort of like playing tennis. Like the ball's in your court, hit it back. So you feel a little nudge of being like, oh, go call this person at this time. Follow through, see what happens, experiment, play. It basically tells the universe that you're game, that you're curious, that you're willing for more. And the more that you do that, the signals will become more clear. You'll be able to hear more consistently. And spirit speaks in a language that's just unique to you. So there's no book that you can read in order to figure it out. The way that you figure it out is by listening, taking action on the nudge, seeing what comes back to you, and then volleying again.
Are you inviting new clients in? Who are you looking to work with, and how can they find you?
I am if I'm interested in folks who are curious about life and who are really hungry for partnership with spirit. And if that's you, and if this conversation has resonated, please go to my website, tiffanymchan.com, and there's a little form out there. We can have a little brief chat and just see what this is all about. What I would offer is I am very grateful to serve as a guide and as a teacher, but I use those words as common parlance because that's what's socially acceptable. Really, I'm just a catalyst for your own knowing. I'm just a person who's bringing you home to yourself, who's here to help you trust the connection that is inherent. And so if this appeals to you in any way, reach out. I'd be it would be my pleasure to serve in that regard. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. I love the word catalyst, and your face lit up so much when you said it. Biggest smile.
Yeah.
It's very true. And one of the biggest things I'm taking out of today for myself is our conversation about ego. And very profound. That's the part I'm going to be listening to. And because I find that's where, it's funny. Ego is where people trip up on the way to enlightenment, but then it's not going anywhere. And you might get that spiritual ego.
Comes back around.
Yeah. So would you say that, just get one super quick question. Would you say that when people are getting synchronicities and getting what we call manifestations and guidance that leads to beautiful things, and they get all giddy about it, like, oh, look what's happening, and I saw this sign, and I this worked out, like, is that being an ego? Is that being taking it as if it's something magical while it's something normal?
I would say relish in it, savor in it, like allow yourself to like fully experience it and be open to be a vehicle for that to happen on behalf of others.
Beautiful way to finish up. Thank you so much, Tiffany.
Thank you.